And we'll get this posted to the website in the coming days so you can review it if you'd like. We're here to talk about the ITQ. Our presenters today, we've got Matt Behrens with us. He's our Chief Information Officer. Jessica Turba is our Program Administrator. My name is Anna Cochin. I'm the Contracts Program Administrator. Patrick Wilkie-Brown is our Geospatial Coordinator. And Greg Labey is a Grant Administrator with FG who's helping us through this ITQ process. Our agenda for today, we're going to go over the purpose of the meeting. We're going to do a high-level ITQ overview and actually, oh, Matt tells me I'm not sharing my screen. I am so sorry, guys. Let me see. How about that? Okay. We'll go over the ITQ. Matt will go through the document and address things that need to be addressed. We'll be taking questions as we move through that. I'll go over the ITQ landing page where everything is posted. Jessica's going to talk a little bit about the Iowa grants registration and application instructions. And then Greg will give us an overview of a sample application and artifacts, as well as the geographic area of concern selection tool. And then we've got a slide for technical assistant resources. And we'll be taking any questions that we didn't get to throughout the conference. We'll take those at the end. So the purpose of today's meeting is to go over the ITQ. This is an opportunity for potential applicants to ask questions about the process. Any responses we give to your questions during this conference are non-binding. If you'd like a binding response, that'll become part of the ITQ. We do ask that you participate in our written question and answer period that will begin immediately following this conference. There is a hyperlink on our website. I'll show you that a little bit later in the conference, but the link is here on your screen. Please type your questions into the chat. We're going to keep everybody on mute just to kind of keep the conference moving forward. But intermittently, I will address questions that come through the chat. And then just always, our help desk email is ociogrants@iowa.gov. Any questions you have should go there. Matt, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Behrens. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the state of Iowa. I'm happy to be with you here today to talk a little bit about our invitation to qualify. So before we launch into the document and talk about the specifics of an application, I thought it might be good to take a second to just provide an overview of what an invitation to qualify is. This is really a construction that's based in state procurement rules, and ordinarily ITQs are designed to qualify vendors into a pool. And once they're in that pool, they'll have an opportunity to, for instance, bid on an RFP. We're using a similar construction with this ITQ, except in this case, communities are qualifying, and the process of qualification results in what we're calling a broadband intervention zone, which is an area that would be established on our map. And if providers choose to build in that area, they might receive increased incentives or higher ranking or more points in a grant opportunity. And so really the ITQ presents the first time in the state of Iowa that communities have a chance to influence some of the decision-making around the allocation of funding and really to participate in our process for where broadband funding goes across the state. That's important because that kind of construction leads to the second bullet, which is about who can be an applicant. So the ITQ itself is open to what we call community applicants in the ITQ. And we'll return to this definition when I go through the ITQ itself, when we think about who can be an applicant, it's city or county governments, school districts, consortia of political subdivisions, organizations representing communities and regional entities, those such as those with an economic development mission or an educational mission, that sort of thing. Applicants cannot be individuals or broadband providers or consultants who are helping communities to submit an application. So the application to the ITQ needs to be submitted and owned by a community. It's also important to note, and I'll say this a couple of times, that this is not a grant opportunity. So in applying to the ITQ as a community, you're not becoming a grantee. There's no exchange of funds that are associated with this. So all of the sort of red tape that you would think of with a grant, that's not applicable here because this isn't a grant opportunity. It's a way for you as a community to help us identify where funding should be distributed in future grant opportunities. And that's really what this ITQ is all about. And we're really doing that, as it says in the third bullet, to give communities that voice that they may not have had in the past as much, to help us prioritize where funding should go. So, I'll say one last time, it's not a grant opportunity, but we do intend to use the ITQ results to help us prioritize those funding decisions. You can go to the next slide, Anna. So we have a timeline, and this looks familiar to those of you who have worked through our NOFA processes before, our grant processes, that sort of sets forth how things are going to happen in this grant. And that begins with the pre-publication of the ITQ that was announced on February 2nd. Of course, all those materials are available on our website, and I'll go through that landing page here in a bit. February 15th is today, and today we're hosting the statewide pre-application conference. This video will be recorded and will be made available later so that people can watch it who couldn't attend today. This pre-application conference also commences a written question and answer period. So following this meeting, we'll be posting to our website an online form that you can use to submit formal questions to the office and for which we'll respond with a binding answer that, as Anna mentioned, will be incorporated into the ITQ. So the answers that we provide today verbally are non-binding. If you want that formal official answer, using that form is an important part of getting those answers back. Those questions are due to our office by February 28th. They're due by February 22nd, and we'll be posting them on February 28th. So questions are due on the 22nd. Answers will be posted on the 28th. And then on March 1st, the application acceptance window will open. And that commences the opportunity for prospective applicants to begin working in the system and submitting applications. The application acceptance window will close on March 31st. And then on or before April 28th, we will post that rank ordered list of broadband intervention zones. Those are the areas that communities submitted to us through the ITQ. So we're in a pre-application period now, and then an application window will open on March 1st. Now, I'll mention this again in the future, but since it's top of mind for me, within the pre-application period, we're posting a draft ITQ, and we may periodically update that ITQ before the official application window opens. In fact, if you go out to the website now, you'll find a version of the ITQ, Exhibit A, that was posted yesterday, just to correct some definitional things and make some clarifications. Nothing material in there, but then that March 1st, it'll be formal adopted ITQ that'll be available online, and any further changes to the ITQ would be handled through an amendment that would be issued formally. You can go to the next slide, Anna. So there are really 4 key exhibits that together comprise what the ITQ is. The first is Exhibit A, and I'll spend some time going through that today. We then have Exhibit B, which is a checklist, and that checklist provides a list of things just for your own housekeeping purposes to kind of check off the things that need to be completed to submit an application. We then have an Exhibit C, which provides registration and application instructions for the Iowa grant system. And then Exhibit D, which provides instructions concerning what we're calling the Geographic Area of Concern Selection Tool. And that's the tool you'll use on a map to identify the geographic area that you want to submit to the ITQ. So those are the parts that we'll talk about today. I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there are any questions on it.
There are a few questions that have come in. How quickly will the cities be eligible for funding? If we are planning to overbuild a town this year, should we still submit an application?
So an application to the ITQ is really a starting point for a journey, and that there will be a funding opportunity that will occur this calendar year using capital project fund money. The dates for that have not yet been announced, but it's coming. So this ITQ will lead up to that CPF funding opportunity. And I know I'm not answering a specific question concerning timelines and the specific circumstances of your overbuild, but we encourage any community to apply if they can identify a geographic area that on our map shows that it may be eligible under the federal program guidelines. So when you look at our map, you'll see a number of blue dots that are out there that indicate the conditions of eligibility or whether we think it's likely eligible or not. That likely eligibility is constructed around capital project fund definitions. And so, yeah, you'll have to judge for yourself whether this particular program in this particular year makes sense for your own circumstances. But it's always better to be in the ITQ as a broadband intervention zone than not. So we encourage everyone to apply.
Yeah, before I give the next question, I'll just say again, this recording will be posted on our website in the coming days. So you'll have access to that. The next question that came through, Matt, is are Council of Governments able to apply for the ITQ?
Yes, Council of Governments are eligible community applicants.
Can you confirm that a high ed school, university, who is a community anchor institution, is a qualified applicant?
I'd ask that you submit that to us in writing. I can answer for K-12 school districts, but we would need to investigate further the question of universities and whether they qualify under the definition.
Does failing to respond to the ITQ disqualify an entity from applying for funds? And there's a follow-up too, but I'll let you get to that one.
Sure. So keep in mind that the entity that's applying is a community and in the ITQ. The entity that's applying in the NOFA is a communication service provider. Now, if you are a municipality that intends to, build your own broadband network, you can do both. There's no prohibition against you submitting to the ITQ and then submitting an application to the NOFA subsequently.
The second part of that question was, or does a successful ITQ prioritize or provide preference points to a later applicant?
That's exactly what it does. So, I mean, the point of the ITQ is to add an additional layer to the map so that when we run a grant opportunity, broadband providers who want to apply for funds can see those areas within which, if they do propose a grant to build out in those areas, they might receive increased matching levels or higher points that make them more likely to receive funds.
What is the definition of a nonprofit?
I want to be very specific on this, so I'd ask that you submit that in writing. We'll have to provide you with an answer that makes reference to certain elements of state law, and I want to make sure it's specific. So that would be one to send to us in writing.
Oh, he's suggesting 501c4.
It's very possible. I'm just not. I hesitate to give you an answer because I'd want to make sure that we get it right.
That's all we have for now, Matt.
Okay. Wonderful questions. Keep them coming. We're happy. We'll be pausing intermittently here to make sure we scoop up all the things that you're asking about. Okay, so what I want to do, just by way of orientation, for those of you who may not have had a chance to visit the website or spend much time in it, is Anna is going to share her screen here. This is the landing page for the invitation to qualify, and all of the materials that we'll be talking about today are contained on this site. So not only can you find kind of the general overview that's posted next to that official notice, but you'll also find a brief instructional video that's posted down there at the bottom of the screen, and kind of our one-page flyer that you can distribute as you see fit that can help raise awareness about this ITQ with those communities that you may serve. The ITQ Exhibit A is also posted here right under there. You can see there's information about the pre-application conference, and then the written question form that I mentioned earlier will be presented here at the close of this meeting. So submitting a written question, you'll come to this page. And then we get into all of our program resources. So we can keep scrolling down here, Anna. That we have eligibility, how the ITQ is structured. Keep going. There's our timeline. And here are all of the exhibits and artifacts. Now, what we tried to do here is, as I mentioned, there are 4 key exhibits that we'll go through today. We've got that flyer, and then we've created a sample application. So you can look at each of the elements that comprise a full and complete application and get some examples of how you might follow some of those kind of paint by numbers in order to create your own application to the ITQ. There'll be some additional instructional videos that will be posted on here when we get to the publication of the geographic selection tool. And the geographic selection tool link will also be out here again. Now, I've made reference to that a couple of times, but maybe I should pause for a minute and say, what is the geographic selection tool? It's a special version of Broadband Map V5 that'll be made available sometime next week, that lets you identify your geographic area of concern and downloads information that we use to then score your application. So that's one of the things we'll be talking about today, is how you use that geographic area of concern selection tool in order to create that area that you want to submit to us. And that'll also be posted out here. Okay. I think at this point, we're going to go into Exhibit A. Is that correct, Anna? Your screen says.
Yeah, I think this is where we're going to talk about Exhibit A, yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and have Anna assign me to be the host so that I can share my screen. There we go. I'm going to pull up now the ITQ Exhibit A, and we'll take some time for this, and please send your questions to us as we go through. This is one of those sort of legal documents that no one likes to contend with, but it's got some important guidance about how we're going to proceed with the ITQ. So I'm going to take some time and try to walk you through exactly what's in here to give you a sense for what this document discusses. So we start out with kind of an overview of where we've been with the Empower Rural Iowa broadband program since 2018. As many of you know, the program has run 7 grant opportunities and distributed $350 million across Iowa. When those projects are complete, it'll result in $680 million of new broadband investment across the state that we expect to serve 109,000 approximately homeschools and businesses. But as we look to the future, we know that there are a couple of things that we have to be mindful of. First of all, changes in federal program guidelines that require increased amount of local collaboration and coordination. So we know especially that's coming with the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act program, and it's something that we wanted to think about as we move forward here. The second is that we feel strongly that, having looked at the grants that we've received to date and all of the fantastic work that our broadband providers in Iowa have done, we still have some locations across the state that are eligible but may never have received an application, let alone received an award. We often hear from communities about these concerns that, they really don't feel like their voices are heard in the process. And that's really what the ITQ is designed to do, is to lift up these communities and give them an opportunity to help begin to direct some of the funding distribution that happens here, so that we can see funding in the future go to some of those locations where communities would like to see it. So those are really the 2 reasons that underlie this ITQ. Now, I note again, my favorite disclaimer, you've heard me say it already. It's important to note this isn't a grant opportunity. So if you're weighing whether you want to do this or not, it's important to understand that you're not becoming a grantee and you're not having to commit to all the requirements that you might as a subrecipient of federal money. This is purely an opportunity for us to gather information from you to help us make the program as effective as it can be going forward. We've dealt with a number of different federal funding sources already in this program. We're going to deal with a number of new ones. And the ITQ, as it's structured, begins to anticipate some of those things. So when we look at some of the elements that we'll be evaluating here, some of them are tied closely to the Capital Projects Fund, and some of them are tied into the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund under the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. Part of that is just to begin data collection and analysis across the state, which is consistent with the guidelines that we've been given from federal programs. And so when you see things in here, why are they asking that? Why are they doing this? It's probably because to some degree, we're trying to link up to different federal program requirements. So you can take your own time to read through this and kind of understand the background and the problem statement, but this section is just really an introduction. Now, the other thing I want to point out is I've used two terms here that I want to emphasize a little bit further that are talked about in the beginning of this. The first is the term geographic area of concern. You heard me talk earlier about the geographic area of concern selection tool. The second term that you've heard me use is broadband intervention zone. Those two things are linked together. The geographic area of concern is the area that you are going to identify on the Iowa's broadband map and present to us as part of your ITQ application. You're going to identify a geographic area of concern. The office will then evaluate your application and indeed all the applications that we receive. And those applications, once reviewed and awarded, will become broadband intervention zones. The broadband intervention zones are the output of the process. The geographic area of concern is the input. And so when you think about that, a geographic area of concern, when it grows up, becomes a broadband intervention zone. We've already talked about the timetable, so I won't go back through this again. That was on the PowerPoint slide we just discussed. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions, the ones at least that I want to call your attention to. The first is that the federal program guidelines that we're paying attention to really think about 120 megabit service as the conditions for eligibility. So if you don't have 120 or faster, then you become eligible on the map. Capital Projects Fund adds a new layer of complexity that says if you don't have 120 wireline, you may be eligible. And so that's the definition that's used here and the criteria that's used to establish eligibility conditions on the map. Of course, that map is Broadband Availability Map version 5, which is posted on our website. But if you go there today, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First is we're finalizing appeal decisions right now. And next week, we'll be publishing that final adopted version of the map. Along with that, we'll be publishing the geographic area of selection tool. So you won't find either of those things if you go out there today, but you will find the baseline version of Broadband Availability Map version 5, and that will give you a sense of whether there are believed to be eligible locations within your community and can help get you thinking about where you might identify a geographic area of concern today. And again, the final data set will be published next week along with the selection tool. But the map we have out there right now is a good place to start just to get a feel for the conditions of broadband and whether there's eligible locations that are near your area or within your community. I've already talked about the broadband intervention zone. Those are the final areas that will be published on our map. When we evaluate your applications, we assign to each of them a composite score. It's called a broadband readiness score. And that is the sum of all of the points for the different categories that are evaluated for your application. And so that broadband readiness score is the final composite number that we use to rank order that list of broadband intervention zones. We also have some other terms in here that are important to know, but for our purposes, I'll skip through. We have this thing called broadband units on our map today. There are over 1 million broadband serviceable locations identified in Iowa. Each of those locations is a broadband unit, whether it has service or it doesn't. But we need a way to encapsulate how many units exist in any given area. Talked about the definition of community applicant and who that includes and who it doesn't. You'll find that here. And if you have questions, for example, about what a nonprofit is, go ahead and send that to us. We'll be doing things like when we look at your area, beginning to consider factors that are described within certain federal programs. And I'll talk about that some more later. But one of those factors is this notion of a covered population, which is comprised of a number of different demographic measures within your community. So covered populations include things like aging individuals, veterans, individuals with a disability, and so forth. We'll measure those things, and that becomes a part of the score that's assigned to the broadband intervention zone that you have. We also have this notion of eligible service locations. Those are locations that don't meet that threshold for 120 wireline or faster. There's two different types of eligible service locations in this program, unserved and underserved. And I'll talk a little bit about more of the definitions a little bit later on. I've already talked about that geographic area of concern. That's your input to the program. Broadband intervention zone is the output, but there are some constraints on how a geographic area of concern can be designed. The first thing is you have to use the selection tool that we publish on our map next week in order to create that geographic area of concern. So you can't create it manually or draw on a map and scan it and send it to us. You have to use the tools that we provide online. There have to be eligible service locations within that area. So if you have a circle and you're going to put it on the map, there must be locations that are either unserved or underserved that reside within that circle. We may refactor in order to calculate some of the characteristics of your zone, those eligible locations into some polygons on our map. And that's a lot of detail, but if you have questions, when you draw your circle and you send it to us, we will convert that into a shape. And that shape will become the basis for your broadband intervention zone. And it probably won't look like a circle anymore. The circle is the way you select the locations. The shape that emerges from those is identified by the address, the actual addresses that exist within your circle. And so that's one thing I just want to prepare you for, is that when we announce your intervention zone, it may look from a shape perspective different from the circle you originally drew, because we have to convert that circle into a shape in order to measure certain things about it. Lastly, no geographic area of concern can exceed 200 square miles in size. This number was established with reference to the hundreds of applications we've received over the last 7 grant rounds, and it reflects our understanding of projects that are most likely to be built. So we looked out one standard deviation from the average project size that we have received for the last 7 grant rounds. That's 200 square miles, and that's the limit. So you can't have a broadband intervention zone that's the size of an entire county or the size of the entire state. It has to be a buildable project area. Selection tool I've already mentioned. There are, as I mentioned, broadband units. That definition covers every location in the state. There are broadband units that are served today. They have 120 wireline service or faster. There are broadband units that are unserved and underserved. And then there are also broadband units called previous incentive locations. So any given location today that's on our map may not have service, may not have any service at all, but it also may not be eligible under this ITQ or future programs because a grant has already been awarded for that area. That grant has just not yet completed build out. So when you look at any given area, you have to think through, why does it reflect this particular eligibility determination? And there are a number of factors that go into that. And of course, if you reach out to us with questions, we'd be happy to work with you to understand why any location, a given location, is eligible or ineligible. And sometimes that turns not on the conditions of broadband in the ground, but that a grant has been awarded to that area that will be built out in the future. I've also, just to put a point on this underserved location and unserved location. Unserved location is any location that has below 120 wireline speed or greater. That's got below that amount. An unserved location is any location that has below 25.3. We assign more points to broadband intervention zones that have more unserved locations. You still get points for underserved ones, but intervention zones that have unserved locations get more points. So I'm going to pause there and ask Anna if there's any questions in the chat window.
Yeah, we have a few. Is a community that already has likely eligible locations in broadband version map 5 already identified as a broadband intervention zone? Or does the community still need to submit an application to the ITQ?
The community would still need to submit an application to the ITQ in order to be identified as a broadband intervention zone on our map. Does not mean that a provider to a future NOFA could not submit a bid to build in your community, however. So you don't need to have a broadband intervention zone in order for your community to be eligible under a future grant. You need to have a broadband intervention zone if you want a provider who submits a grant application to receive more points or potentially receive higher incentives for building in your area. So the idea is to create kind of magnets. These broadband intervention zones would then attract build out, would encourage providers to locate new service there. But we're not going to require in the future grant program that providers only build in intervention zones. It's just if they do, they're going to be an increased likelihood they're going to get funding, and they may get higher matching levels. And some of that's still being determined as we draft the next NOFA.
The rules prohibit an application for a geographic area of concern greater than 200 square miles in size. That limitation would mean that a county would likely need to split their areas of need into several small applications. However, having several areas in close proximity, such as multiple areas in one county application, is discouraged under section 2.32. Does this mean that an applicant covering a larger area, such as a county, school district, or COG, would need to be selective about the areas they identify, even if there is need in multiple areas?
We would encourage you to be selective, but we're not going to prohibit you from submitting multiple applications either. The truth is that we have to be selective when we make funding allocations, which means we're making choices between the needs in one area and the needs in another. Part of the ITQ is to express to potential applicants that there is a degree of scarcity here. There's trade-offs and there are decisions that have to be made at any given time concerning which areas have the greatest need. Any county that would submit multiple intervention zones, for example, those intervention zones will receive different scores based on the factors that we're evaluating. So when you look at this and you think, where is the areas of greatest need? Sometimes, we're not going to tell you can only submit one, but we are going to say, if there are multiple and they're adjacent, we may look at that and say, there's an interest here because of the scarcity of the funds to look at geographic diversity, to consider the relative merits of the needs in multiple places. And that may mean we only are able to select one of those if they're right next to each other. We want you to tell us where you think the needs are, but understand that we're making decisions with limited resources, and so we have to be selective about where we go. And we would ask that you think about that as well as you think about what areas you might like to select and submit to us. Is really help us focus on the areas that you believe are the largest challenges. Not to say that there are other areas that don't have challenges too.
Will you only be able to use a circle to select a zone, or can you use a polygon?
You can only use a circle. We went through lots of different selection options for this. And the truth of the matter is when we get into different kinds of polygons, it creates additional challenges for us in terms of administering and triaging those submissions. So after much discussion and substantial discussion, the circle is the tool that you'll need to use.
Okay. If a community now has 110, and community muni provider is in the process of upgrading to DOCSIS 3.1 to offer more than 120 this spring, should this community file an ITQ for possible future funding?
Well, I think that I would start by looking back at some of the past grant opportunities that we've submitted. So the ITQ is useful to you if especially if you have no prospective build out coming in. Because grant programs, when we officiate them, we ask a question historically, and I'm sure we'll ask it in the next grant round, which is there construction underway? And if there's construction underway, that can be disqualifying for a grant application. So you can certainly go out in the map and it'll say your area is eligible and submit a grant, an ITQ application. But know that when we get to the grant, we'll be asking for information about pending build out or active construction that's underway. And if it's determined that there's construction underway to meet that 120 standard, it will probably be disqualifying. So in that particular case, it might be a waste of your time to submit an ITQ application, because ultimately that won't result in a grant given the fact that build out is underway.
What about future development areas for housing that have fiber nearby but have not been served in the main provider by the main provider? Our fiber company built out the fiber in the new subdivision located beside the future development area that the other provider would not build in. So fiber is the option in the area, but currently does not have any addresses, but will be under construction in the next 6 to 8 months. It's currently not a served area that wouldn't be served unless the city can partner to build out in these new areas.
Sure. So that particular case is a great example of something that I think can be addressed, not in this particular program, but in the next one that's coming under the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. For this ITQ, the addresses must exist on Broadband Map V5. If they don't exist today, then they can't be identified as eligible service locations. There's a limitation of the data, and we know that construction is continually happening around the state. There will, however, be another mapping opportunity late in the year And I would encourage you to stay with us and track on that to make sure we get those addresses into our system, because it's very possible that they could be eligible for a future round of grant funding, just perhaps not this ITQ and the NOFA that will immediately follow.
How about one more? We have, how will rural areas near a metro be able to compete for selection based on geographic diversity? A metro would always have higher numbers of need.
Well, geographic diversity as measured here isn't a function of your proximity to a metro. You may be talking about community characteristics, but geographic diversity is measured by the number of applications that we receive in any given U.S. congressional district. It is not a highly weighted component of this ITQ, so I don't necessarily see that as a key differentiator between, for instance, a rural or an urban application. There are other factors that may have that effect. For example, if a urban location is within an intervention zone has more eligible service locations, if you're able to aggregate more of those into a geographic area of concern, that can result in more points. But conversely, that can be overcome by other things that can be provided by the community. And we'll talk about some of those things as we get into scoring. But one really good example is community broadband capital. So if your community is able to offer in-kind or financial contributions that can help to accelerate or catalyze a broadband project in your area, there are a considerable amount of points there. And those can outweigh some of the other factors in the ITQ.
Great. That's all we have for now, Matt.
Questions. I appreciate you asking all of them. Section 2 is administrative information, and it's not my intent to spend a lot of time with you on this, but this provides an overview of how we administer the program. So we're in the pre-publication process right now. We've shown you where the website is and how you can download the information that's here. We're in the pre-application conference today, and this talks further in section 2.6 about the written Q&A period that we'll be entering into immediately following the closure of this meeting today. I already mentioned the application acceptance window will open on March 1st, and then applications are due on March 31st. And that the end of April or before, we'll be announcing those broadband intervention zones. I also mentioned, but it bears repeating perhaps, that, as we get questions from all of you, and we learn things through clarification processes, we may amend the ITQ if we find a problem or an area that needs to be changed or some inconsistency that exists. So when we make those amendments, we'll post them to our website and we'll notify people on our mail list that that's happening. Is there anything else here? There are a couple of things I want to point out on the rejection disqualification. Now, for those of you who've been through grant rounds with us, you know that occasionally, not very often, we are required to reject or disqualify an application. And the same thing's true in this invitation to qualify. Now, the good news is the criteria for that is all set forth here. And most of these things rarely, if ever, happen. But I want to call your attention to a couple of them. The first thing is if we determine that you as the applicant don't fit the definition of a community applicant. In that particular case, we will disqualify your application. Another example is if we find that your geographic area of concern exceeds 200 square miles. Now, if you use the geographic area selection tool that we're going to talk about today, you can't actually exceed a 200 square mile area. It limits you to 200 square miles. But if an applicant were to manually go in and add addresses or change that file that's downloaded or manipulated in some way, we'll find out about that, and that would be grounds for disqualification. One way it could happen is that it shows us that the area becomes larger than the 200 square miles. Another is that we just see that the file has been changed in such a manner that it's not consistent with what would have been downloaded from the selection tool. And finally, these geographic areas of concern need to contain eligible service locations. So if you placed a geographic area of concern circle over an area where the map shows there are no eligible locations, that would be grounds for disqualification. So don't send to us a circle that doesn't have any unserved or underserved homes in it, because that would just not be ranked and scored. It would be because it doesn't have any locations in it that need to be served. So there's a number of other things in here. Most of these hardly ever occur, but if they did and it affected you, we would let you know. Failure to sign a form or something like that, altering language in an exhibit, they're not going to happen to you. But they're listed here because it's just our practice to make sure that you all understand as applicants the grounds for any disqualification that may occur. We may contact references as a part of this. So if you give us a reference or a contact person, we may contact them. We may also contact you after your application has been submitted and ask for clarifications. So once we've received all the applications and the application acceptance window closes, we'll go through a process of reviewing those applications and adjudicating them. And if we find something that, we're not sure what was meant here, or we're wondering if this is correct, we may call you or email you and request a clarification. So know that could occur. Everything that you submit to us through this application process is a matter of public record. Your applications will be posted on our website, and they will remain there and be available for the public to download and look at. So we always try to run a very transparent and public-facing process. So just know that the information you send us will ultimately be packaged up and posted on our website as part of your application. Once we've reviewed all of the applications that have been submitted, we'll publish a final broadband intervention zone list, and you can see your area and its rank, and then that will ultimately be driven into the grant program through a future NOFA. We offer comprehensive administrative and technical support through this program at no cost to you. Most of you, if you've been through a NOFA process before as a broadband provider, you're familiar with this. But we have a team of people and consultants that are here to help you. And it's important to us that you have your questions answered and know that you are our priority in getting you through this, especially if you've never dealt with a broadband program before. There can be a lot of confusing and technical terms, and this team has a lot of experience helping people through that journey. So please do not hesitate. I really encourage you, reach out to us by emailing OCIOgrants@iowa.gov, and I promise a real human being will get back to you and be happy to have a conversation with you about what your questions are. So use that resource, it's available to you. One last thing, this 232 and 233, and this goes back to the prior question we had about a county maybe submitting multiples, is that the truth is this is the first time that we've run this program. And so we're not exactly sure what configuration of broadband intervention zones we'll ultimately receive. And so based on what comes in, if there's overlap between in a geographic area of concern submitted by two applicants, or if there's a concentration of broadband intervention zones that doesn't form a buildable project or natural project, we reserve the right to make some changes. And that's true throughout, is that we may adjust broadband intervention zones. We may remove overlapping addresses from one intervention zone and assign them to a higher ranking intervention zone. So there will be some modification that happens through this procedurally if we see unusual circumstances, close groupings, or overlap especially are things that we'll be watching out for, so that we can avoid the confusion that might be associated in a grant program with having two intervention zones that are overlapping. And what does that say in terms of the incentives or the points that should be awarded in a grant opportunity for that person that comes in with an application to build there? So there's some flexibility designed into the system for that. Now we get into section 3, which is relating to the form and content of applications. And you can see there's a number of required forms and submissions here that you'll have to complete in order to get through the application. When you go to the Iowa grant system, and Jessica will be talking about this, you'll notice there's some general information that will require you to provide to us: your name, your address, your telephone number, that sort of thing. You'll also be required to submit a cover letter. And this is a sort of a general overview on your letterhead to provide a description of this particular community's need, their interest, and why this application is important. I mentioned the application checklist, and I'll show you that at the end. That application checklist is just purely for you as a way to help you track the completeness of your application. So you can go through and say, do I have all these things completed? Yes, I'm ready to go ahead and submit. You do not have to return Exhibit C, the application checklist, to us. When you go to the geographic area of concern selection tool that we've talked about a couple of times, you'll download a file from that once you've identified your area. That's called the Eligible Service Locations Worksheet. It's important to know that a geographic area of concern, really, it's not a circle. That's the way we think about it kind of conceptually, but it's really a list of addresses. It's a list of eligible service location addresses. And you're going to download that list from the geographic area of concern selection tool and send it to us and upload it to the Iowa grant system. So that's the kind of the big piece we want to work through with you, because that can be a little confusing. We don't want it to be. It's designed to be easy, but we'll talk about that some more. The Iowa grant system also requires you to complete a minority impact statement. And then we'll move into some optional things. When we get into the scoring here in just a second, you'll notice that the scoring is two parts for every geographic area of concern, quantitative and a qualitative. The quantitative components happen automatically. When you send us that, we're calling it the eligible service location spreadsheet, that's all we need in order to give you a quantitative score, because that's going to give us all the data to do these calculations. If you want more points and thus a higher rank order and increased likelihood of someone building in your area, then you'll want to complete these optional qualitative factors. And there's 4 of them, and I'll touch on them here and then mention them again. But the first is a narrative. And we're just talking about a couple of pages, maybe, about the implications or the barriers, perhaps, to work, education, and health monitoring that your community has realized as a result of poor broadband service. So you're going to tell us here about things like, well, the students in our high school have a 1-to-1 program. They all come home with laptops, but they can't do their homework at home because we don't have any broadband. So they have to go to the public library or use a Wi-Fi hotspot at a fast food restaurant or something. So you would write that narrative here. That's an impact for education that's happening in your community. Another thing that you would submit optionally is community support artifacts. And this would be letters or testimonials from members of the community. It could be elected leaders, it could be key business leaders that, evidence support from within the community for your application. We'll also be asking in this section about community broadband capital. And those are those in-kind or financial contributions that I mentioned earlier that your community can make to accelerate a broadband project. And that might be something like a no-cost easement to grant access for siting a wireless transmitter on a water tower, for example. Or it could be that your community has ARP funding that they can contribute to a project. You'll document those things there. And lastly, you'll tell us a little bit about barriers to broadband infrastructure installation, which are the reasons you believe that broadband hasn't come to your community yet. Could be the rurality of your location. It could be soil conditions or topography, but tell us here your sort of description of why it's complicated to put broadband, or it's been prohibitively expensive, or any number of reasons broadband hasn't come to your location. So those are the optional and mandatory forms, the required forms and the optional forms. And of course, those kind of tie in to the scoring, the optional and mandatory sort of scoring criteria. So I'm going to pause one more time before I wrap up my section and ask Anna if there are any questions.
There are. As a small city rep, when we have a provider claiming that they cover our area on this map, but they don't, how can we prove to show that they truly do not service our area to where we are not underlooked and potentially disqualified in the application process?
Sure. So here's what I would tell you is that about every year we issue a new map of the state, and that map's published online, and then it's made available for an appeal process where anyone in Iowa, be it a broadband provider or a member of the public, or indeed a community, can challenge the data that's on the map and say exactly what you mentioned. This provider's reporting that they're here, but we know they're not, and provide us with information. First of all, an attestation that of that position, but then additional evidence like speed tests and things like that. The appeal window for this map has closed. However, there will be another appeal window late this year. And what we would really encourage you to do is, follow, subscribe to our email listserv by going to our website and follow those updates so that when we have the next map appeal window, you participate in it and give us that evidence, because that can be all the difference in lighting up those eligibility determinations for your community. But it all turns on the extent to which you tell us that the conditions of broadband aren't what has been reported to us by that broadband provider on our map.
Will the challenge data from fall 2022 be incorporated in the new map coming out next week? We had hundreds of people in 2 small cities participate in the challenge to demonstrate that they are not receiving the speeds and service they are paying for.
So the map that will be released, we are wrapping up the last batch of challenges right now. It is my understanding that those will be presented on the map that's published next week. If you see any sort of evidence that that's not the case, please contact our office.
Will the availability map, database, or shapefiles be available for download or as a service?
You can download certain shape files and data from the map right now. You will not need to do that for the purpose of submitting an ITQ application, however. For the purpose of submitting an ITQ application, the geographic area of selection tool will present you with the map, show you all the eligible service locations, and then an overlay for you to make that project selection. That's all we're intending to provide with that piece of it. But you can certainly contact us and ask for any other extracts of data that you would like to see, if that's helpful to you.
That's all we have for now, Matt.
Very good. So I'm going to wrap up my section. You've all been very patient and I appreciate the questions. Just talking a little bit about scoring. So of course, we're going to take the application from you, we're going to open it up, and we're going to score it based on a number of factors. And that score then results in the points that are allocated to your broadband intervention zone. There's a maximum of 100 points available in this ITQ. And they're, as I had mentioned earlier, divided into quantitative, mandatory, and optional qualitative factors. And that results that composite broadband readiness score. As we go through our review, there are two other processes besides scoring that ITQ applications may be subject to. The first is that we may make an adjustment to the broadband intervention zone based on an assessment of project buildability. So if we look at your geographic area of concern and we find that perhaps it cuts out a house that's just outside your circle, or if it makes sense to include these three based on an appraisal with our consultants, we may add those houses in. So there may be minor adjustments that happen to your intervention zone. I don't anticipate that, but we need to have the flexibility to make sure that the intervention zone is appropriately positioned on the map. The second is we will look at intervention zones to see if there are previous wireless incentives that have been offered in those areas. There are many locations in Iowa that are subject to wireless incentives for build out that have not been completed yet. Those areas will get wireless service. And so they're in a different condition than an area that has no service today and has no future grant coming. So if there's wireless that is going to be coming to an area, we will move those broadband intervention zones lower down on the list. So that intervention zones that have no broadband service and no grants coming have that higher ranking on the list. So there's some adjustment there. And of course, when you look at our map, you can see if a grant has been issued to an area and whether it was wired or wireless service for which it was issued. And you are indeed welcome to contact our staff and ask for more information about the specifics of that grant if you have questions. So let's talk about the quantitative factors. There are three of them. When we look at the circle that you send us, that geographic area of concern, the first thing that we're going to evaluate is the number of eligible service locations that it contains. You might recall that I said there's two types of eligible service locations. There's an unserved location. Those are places that don't even have 25.3, and there's an underserved location. And those are places that don't have 120 wireline or faster. We'll add all of those up, and that will give you a point total for eligible service locations. Talked already about geographic diversity. That's where we look at the number of applications we received in each U.S. congressional district, and we award some points to help balance out where these geographic areas of concern are. That's a small factor. And then we get into this factor called community characteristics. And I want to talk about that for just a second. Community characteristics is divided into two components: covered populations and anchor institutions. When you send us your geographic area of concern, we will apply geospatial data layers to that area to make some determinations about the composition, the demographics of the population that lives in that geographic area. We'll be looking at poverty level, aging individuals, veterans, individuals with a disability, English learners, literacy, racial or ethnic minority residents, and rurality. You don't have to do anything to help us count these. By sending us your area, you've taken care of everything you need to do. We will derive this data from the data sources that are identified here. It's predominantly the American Community Survey data. And so we'll make estimates from that American Community Survey data and a couple other data sources that estimate the demographics or the population characteristics that are within that area of concern that you give us. And if you're higher than the state average, you may get more points. And so we'll look at some of those things as we make the point awards. And then we'll look at anchor institutions. So we have existing data sets about the locations of schools, hospitals, correctional institutions, and so forth. We will take those data. We will see if your area includes one or more anchor institutions, and you'll receive more points if it does. Those factors comprise the quantitative part of this, for which you have to take no additional steps besides completing the baseline application. If you choose, you may also respond to the optional factors. And if you respond to the optional factors, you will get more points, and more points results in a higher ranking. I've already talked about these a little bit, but I'll cover them briefly. That first one is that narrative response on the impacts to work, education, and health monitoring that your community has experienced because of insufficient broadband connectivity. I mentioned the one-to-one program for high school students. You might talk about that here, or you might find other examples. In the healthcare space, it may be that you know how far away the closest clinic is, and that residents within your geographic area of concern have to drive long distance to get to that clinic, and that is an imposition on them. If they had broadband, they could access more telehealth services. You might talk about that. You're going to give us that kind of story about the impacts to those factors. Community support, I also mentioned. This is where you would provide letters or testimonials from leaders of anchor institutions or businesses or elected officials that evidence support for this application. Community broadband capital is the next one, and it's really important and receives a large number of points. And that describes the in-kind or financial contributions that your community can make to help catalyze or accelerate a broadband program. We will take these representations that you make in the application and share them with broadband providers that may be interested in submitting a grant application to build in your area. In identifying these items here, it's a non-binding commitment. So you're not entering into a contract with the state that you will offer those, but you are agreeing that you'll work in good faith with a prospective broadband partner to identify whether those things could or could not be used. And ultimately, it's up to that broadband provider to decide how, whether, and to what extent they bring those into a proposed project that they would submit in response to a grant program for the office. Finally, that barriers to broadband infrastructure, that's where you tell us the reasons you believe broadband has not come to your location yet, or factors that complicate the installation of broadband, everything from soil to soil composition to topography to higher proportion of low-income households. All those factors can have an impact on the likelihood broadband will be built, and we would like for you to tell us about them here. 4.3, this is the distribution of points. You can see that the eligible service locations is highly ranked, as is community broadband capital. So those are the factors to pay special attention to. And community characteristics is up there too. I am just about done, so I'll just finish this up. We have a definite discussion here in section 5 about the process that the office will go through to review and make decisions about broadband intervention zones. And of course, here are references and explanations of each of the exhibits. We've already talked about, at least at a high level, Exhibit A here, the application checklist, the registration applications instructions, and that geographic area of concern selection tool. And here indeed is that Exhibit B, the application checklist right at the end, which is provided for your convenience to make sure you're tracking on all the elements that have to be submitted in connection with an application. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and ask Anna if there are any final questions for me to answer.
Yeah. Would survey data from persons in the geographical area we select be good supporting information for an application? If so, would we be able to export the addresses from the selection tool so we could target surveys to those premises?
In fact, that's what the geographic area of selection tool does. It's exporting the addresses. So the minute you identify your geographic area and you click download, we'll show you how to do that in a minute. You'll have the list of addresses. And I think survey data would be a great thing to submit as evidence of community support and, in defense of your application. So that'd be great.
Those are all of our questions for now.
Very good. I'm going to stop sharing, and Anna, I will assign back to you, host.
Next, we're going to have Jessica talk a little bit about the Iowa grant registration. Jessica, I think I'm going to make you host if you're ready.
Go ahead. Okay, So now you should see my screen, which is displaying the iowagrants.gov site. Is that in fact true?
That is true.
Hey, that's great. So some of you or most of you, or maybe not many of you, know that the iowagrants.gov site recently had an upgrade. As of December, first week in December, the old version sunsetted, and then mid-December, the new version came online about December 12th. So for those of you that have been in the new system and have been filling out applications, great. For those of you who have not signed in since mid-December, I would encourage you to go to iowagrants.gov and click the Access Single Sign-On tool to establish your account in the new system. You don't need to re-register. You just need to sign in to get all of your credentials established so that you can work in this new version of the system. So I'm showing you the site for two reasons. One of them is there's this lovely box with a bunch of red lettering in it, and it talks about how you need to follow the login instructions to access the system for the first time. So if you go to this link here, it'll take you to the Department of Management's website. They do have a video to help you through the login instructions for the first time. They also have a PDF with login instructions. It's very important when you're establishing your credentials in the system for the first time that you follow these directions exactly. Intuitively, you will want to do other things than what the instructions are asking you to do. So please read the instructions carefully. Some of the most obvious things that we've seen happen, somebody might forget the email address that they used to establish their account initially. If they had one in the old system, you do need to link with the email address that you used. When you're thinking about signing in for the first time, sometimes you want to use that Iowa ID instead of your email address. Make sure you use your email address. And then this little prompt here under screen 2, this sign up. I know it's not going to feel right to sign up, but if you already have an account, but click that anyway. Make sure that you follow these instructions exactly. If you don't get into the system, there could be two different things going on. One of them might be there is an issue with the connectivity to our Okta system. The other issue could be there's something with the grants management system that needs to be edited or updated. So please, again, follow these instructions exactly. If you do have issues, the very bottom of these instructions, you have a contact. Deb Schroeder, you can contact here related to the login instructions. If you're having issues with the Iowa Grants Management System as it relates to our program, please contact OCIO Grants email address. So with that, I'm going to take you to our application instructions, assuming that you've got into the grant system and you have no issues. You'll start here. You'll always use this single access sign-on tool. And with luck, you'll have a main menu that pops up. And on that main menu, you're going to see a selection called Funding Opportunities. And from there, you can find this ITQ funding opportunity in two different ways. One of them is to use the control number, which we provided in the instructions and in Exhibit A, or you can simply search for broadband and it should come up for you. Once you've selected your funding opportunity, it will give you the instructions or the data points for that opportunity, and you can start an application from that screen. I want you to be aware today, if you log in, you're not going to find it. The application window opens March 1st, and at that time, everything will be available for your review. If you're curious about what the application components look like in Iowa Grants, you can go to Exhibit C on our website and just scroll through the screens. What you're going to see, and Greg's going to go over here shortly, are a couple of new features in the system. Everything that's red is required. Instead of a red asterisk, everything that's red is required. And interestingly enough, we were always taught never to use the back arrow in the system. The back arrow works now. You can use the back arrow. So those are the major things that maybe a seasoned user would like to know about. But otherwise, if you have issues, please let us know. And I'm going to stop there so I don't trample all over Greg.
I'm going to take back hosting duties. Jessica, do you just want to go over our resource slide here for?
Sure. Go ahead and share your screen and then I'll.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so all applicants must register for an account at iowagrants.gov. Please use those instructions. The link to that instruction document that I was going over is on the slide. And if you are stuck and can't get anywhere, please go ahead and email us at ociogrants@iowa.gov, or you can call the help desk number 515-218-1413.
Thank you. Okay, next we've got Greg here to talk about our sample application.
Well, hello. My name is Greg Levy, and as Anna indicated, we'll talk through the sample application. We'll talk through some of those sample artifacts that are available. And then after that, we'll go into that geographic area of concern selection tool that Dr. Behrens talked about earlier. So once you get into the grants system and start your application, there's going to be 4 different sections to complete. So as you see on screen there, there's general information, cover sheet, general information, invitation to qualify, application exhibits, and the minority impact statement. As you complete and submit these, you'll see little green check boxes like the one you see on screen next to general information. So the general information section really is just that, kind of name, rank, and serial number type of stuff. You'll be asked to title your application. We do ask that you include kind of a brief explanation of the area that you are selecting. So for example, rural area northwest of Anytown, Iowa. You'll then click Save, and that's going to add a couple more things on the screen. You'll select your organization, and then you'll click Save again. A lot of clicking through here, but goes pretty quickly. So that brings up a spot where you can add additional applicants. So if you have more than one person that may be working on this application, you can add them here. It is important to note that in order to add them, that person will need to be registered in the Iowa grant system with your organization. Next is about the cover sheet general information. So this literally is name, rank, and serial number. Authorized official is the person that you will have as your main contact for the application. Now, if you are a county or a COG that may be submitting multiple applications on behalf of communities, you'll want to put the representative of that community here on this name, not necessarily the COG. Fiscal officer and agent, this is a product of the system. Doesn't really apply here as this ITQ does not involve any awards of funding or money exchange. So we would just recommend reiterating the authorized official from above in the name spot there. Next is some political boundary information that the office will be gathering. So it'll include the county that your area encompasses. Your area may encompass more than one county, and you can select more than one. Same goes with the districts following that. So asking for congressional districts and Iowa State Senate and House districts. You'll see below each of those boxes that there is a little blue hyperlink to a congressional map, Iowa Senate map, etc., so that you can compare that map to where your geographic area of concern is and select the correct district. Next is the application exhibits. So these are some of the things that Dr. Behrens talked about before. A general description at the top is going to be something similar to your title, just a general description of the area. Community applicant type could be any of those things previously mentioned, county, COGS, government organizations, etc. Then there is a place to upload your cover letter, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is, but it's just a general statement about the area that you're submitting. And then below that, you'll see the eligible surface location spreadsheet. So that's that export from the geographic area of concern selection tool. Then below that is some information that will also come out of that tool. There's a few things that will have you write down actually. And then once you have them written down based on that selection, you'll enter them here. And what that will do is allow the office to replicate that exact area of concern that you've selected and display it on a future version of the map. Here's another area that Dr. Behrens spoke to, and that is around the how broadband facilitates work, education, and health monitoring. So as you mentioned, it's just a narrative. So it's these 3 boxes. You'll enter in the narrative just directly into the Iowa Grants online system. Community support letters. So this is where you would upload a community support letter, testimonials. I know there was a question earlier about doing a survey. And this would be the appropriate place to upload that type of information as well. So what we are looking for from communities and specifically residents or businesses is to include an address and a signature. So we want address, contact information, and signature. And next is a section about community broadband capital. So on screen in the system is going to list a number of examples of things from cash, property tax exemption, anchor business to users, etc. So just a few different examples of things that could be included here in broadband capital. And then you'll just enter those in on the form below. And it's just a series of drop downs. There is a place to upload supporting documentation should you have some sort of tax incentive or something along those lines. You could upload a tax document there, for example. Next is the barriers to broadband section. Again, this is just a brief narrative about things you believe may be barriers to implementing broadband in your area, potential reasons that you don't have it today. And as before mentioned, terrain, rurality, demographics, those are all examples of barriers to broadband. And then lastly, here's the minority impact statement. And again, this is a brief narrative, and it's going to be used to describe how broadband may positively or negatively affect minorities in your area.
If I can just interrupt real quick, Greg, I just want to let the group know, please keep sending in your questions. If I see that it's not directly related to the application process itself, I'm just going to wait till the very end and we'll give those to Matt to answer. But please keep sending them in the meantime. Sorry about that, Greg. Keep going.
No, you're fine. Very good. All right. So the next section here, we're going to go over some of the sample artifacts that will be posted out there on the OCIO website. These are meant to be used to, kind of help guide you in creating your own documentation. Please do not directly copy and paste the information out of these sample letters. That will not result in a very good score. But you'll see here on screen that there's going to be a sample application out there, as well as samples of all of the types of documentation that you may be asked to type in or upload. So this is all out there for your edification and to assist you. So here's a sample cover letter. As you can see, it can just be a one-pager or a few paragraphs, just a little information about the project or the broadband area of concern that you are selecting. Sample barriers to broadband. Again, these are just some examples. We provided 3 that were mentioned before: topography, rurality, and demographics. So again, just a narrative of sorts to kind of explain how these things could be barriers to broadband. Next up is the sample resident testimonial. Again, as mentioned, we want a signature on there, as well as contact information and address. So you want, resident testimonials in particular, or business support letters to be representative of the area of concern that you have selected. And then we've also got some sample language as far as the work, education, and healthcare, and how broadband helps facilitate that. So just kind of, again, more narrative, just examples for you to look at and kind of get an idea of what the office is looking for. Okay. And next we will dive into this geographic area of concern selection tool. Now, as Dr. Behrens noted, this is not yet available. It will be coming out with the new version of the map next week. So if you go out there today, you're not going to find this. You will see map version 5, which you can certainly use, and we encourage you to use, just to get kind of a ballpark figure. You'll get a good idea of what may be eligible in your area from that map. Now, the selection tool that you get when it is available is going to look something like this. For this demonstration, there's just one county populated. I believe it's Crawford County. So when you look at the map, you're going to see the whole state of Iowa populated with these eligible dots across the map. Again, just another note that this ITQ, it's not a guarantee of grant funding. But the areas that you select using this tool are going to be used to determine the target areas for future grant funding opportunities. So again, this does not result in funding this ITQ. Okay, so how this geographic area of concern tool will work is it is going to populate a circle around the area of concern. And you want to start by selecting a point that is relatively in the center of that area that you want to select. So in this example on screen, we've got the small town of Charter Oak, Iowa. And you could either click on a dot on the map, or you can type in an address directly into the address search bar there. So once you've defined that the center, you click on that dot, you're going to get a little pop-up. And that pop-up, sorry, Anna, I tricked you. That pop-up will have 3 little dots on the bottom right. You're going to click that. That's going to give you another little drop down thing, and you'll click set location. So once you've done that, it's going to drop a pin on the map at that location, and then it's going to populate a circle on screen for you. Now that circle is going to look something like this. The default radius is set to 2 miles. You can adjust that. As you'll see on screen, you'll get this bar across the bottom, those gray boxes that you see on the right. And one of the tabs is adjust radius distance. So you'll be able to either use the up down arrows to adjust in 1 mile increments, or you can type directly into that box to adjust it. Now it is important to note the minimum radius of a circle is 1/4 mile, and then the maximum is 8 miles, which represents that 200 square mile area that Dr. Behrens previously referenced. Now, if at any time you want to start over, reset, clear this out, you just click the start over button right there on screen, and it'll wipe this circle off the map. So next up, once you have finalized and you have your circle just as you want it, you want to write down these couple of pieces of information. Write down, take a screenshot, whatever is easiest for you to do, because these are those pieces that you're going to enter into the Iowa grant system as part of your application. So one of them is the address. So you want to write down the address, and that's that center of that circle that you selected, as well as the radius distance. So in this case, it's 219 Main Street, Charter Oak, and the radius distance is 2 miles. Now at this point, you're ready to download that file. So you'll go to the ITQ eligible locations tab, and you're going to click the little download button, and it's going to download the CSV to your computer. And then the next steps from there are going to be to upload that CSV file to your ITQ application in the Iowa Grants online system, and that's in that file upload section that we showed you earlier. You'll continue and complete that ITQ application within the system, and then submit it. And that will all be done from March 1st to March 31st. That's the application window. And again, if you have questions throughout the process, please contact us at ociogrants@iowa.gov.
Great, thanks, Greg. So we have a number of resources for you, just depending on where you're at in the process. Our ITQ landing page is going to be a great resource. Everything is on there, and all the most up-to-date information is going to be on there. Our OCIO help desk is this email address we keep referencing, ociogrants@iowa.gov. For registering at Iowa Grants online, we have this link for those instructions. Iowa Grants online account creation. I'm sorry, maybe I got those two. Oh, the Iowa Grants online login. So this is the actual system. And then if you need help creating or registering for that account, we have a link to the instructions. The ITQ Exhibit C is the grants registration and application instructions. So that is mostly what Greg was going through with the sample application and the screenshots from the registration system. And then last, we have an Exhibit D, which isn't quite published yet, but it's going to be the selection tool instructions. And then this is just a high level overview technical assistance, depending on what it is you need help with. Again, if you need help registering for an account, you're going to go to the grants application instructions. If you need help filling out the application, we have sample application and sample artifacts. If you need help with your geographic area of concern, we have the geographic area of concern selection tool instructions. And then any other questions that we haven't answered during this conference, you can submit those during that live link. It'll be live after this conference, and we will answer those in the next week, or I guess we're giving ourselves a week after you submit them. And then if you still have questions, please contact us at OCIO.grants@iowa.gov. And with that, Matt, if you're ready, we have a few other questions that came in. If addresses were missing from the V5 map and submitted by the challenge deadline, can we assume they will be on the new map to be released next week?
I can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
So in most cases, yes. We made an attempt, if there was a complete address, to map that address and add it to location. In some cases, there were addresses that were on the map. They just were not maybe situated in the right place, so maybe they were missed. We adjusted those where appropriate. And there were some addresses that were submitted that didn't have things like a town or an incomplete street address or no house number. Those are difficult to map, so those will not be on there. There were also some cases where we are not able to find the address. Those are cases where things like parcel data and other commercial sources, imagery, that sort of thing, we were unable to map those, but I think those are very few cases.
Thanks, Patrick. The organization is presumably the municipality or other eligible entity submitting the ITQ. Should contractors or external consultants supporting the ITQ applicant be associated with the eligible entity?
Oh, sorry, I had my microphone off. So the applicant of record needs to be the community. So needs to be a representative of the community that we would traditionally interpret that to be, a city government official or a county government official or an employee of a council of government. So those are the folks that need to submit the application. As a consultant, to them, we put no parameters around, who they can consult with in order to build and develop their application, but they must be the one submitting the application. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but we'd be happy to take a swing at that more formally in writing too. So
I wonder if this speaks to, there's an option in the Iowa grant system that allows folks to be associated with the application itself. And then that way they have access to the application and its components.
I think we should probably address that in writing just to make sure we're correct, but provided that the submitter on the Iowa grant system is the community, it should be fine, but they must be the submitter and the applicant of record.
If that didn't, like Matt said, if that didn't answer your question, please use that link for our written in question period, and we'll get an official answer to you. Next, Matt, I have explain how the community can provide non-binding incentives. I'm concerned that if providers are bidding on the NOFA with the assumption that the community will provide fill in the blank benefit, and then once the project is awarded and the community decides it can no longer provide those incentives, which may have been major factors that providers used to determine if they wanted to submit and win the grant, what stops a community from overstating what they will provide when it comes time for the rubber to meet the road? What protects the providers if the community decides to do that?
keep in mind that this program is divided into two parts. It's divided into an ITQ and a grant application. For the ITQ, the applicant is the community applicant who's making a submission to us representing that they are factually, there's factual representations that are making these non-binding commitments. If we have cause for concern that anything that's represented in an ITQ application isn't factual, we'll address that with the applicant. That creates a list of prospective contributions a community could make. That concludes the ITQ process once that intervention zone is adopted and published, and we're done. That broadband community capital is published in connection with that broadband intervention zone, as I mentioned. Now it's incumbent upon the broadband provider, as they're formulating their application to a future NOFA, the second part of this program, to work with the community to identify and secure commitments for any of those elements of community broadband capital that have been offered. They need to have secured those commitments prior to submitting the application, and the application should reflect that those commitments have been secured. So by the time the broadband provider gets around to submitting an application for us, they either have or have not secured that commitment. It is no longer prospective. So the idea is to provide visibility into those potential areas of contribution and then make that known to prospective broadband providers. But the broadband provider, in formulating their application to a NOFA, must, they've got to secure those things or not. And then if they are secured, represent them as secured as a part of their broadband application. Because we'll consider those, for example, in the past, we've looked at those as elements of local match, for which we may afford additional points to the broadband provider. So they have to secure those things in advance by working with that community to identify whether they can make use of them. And you don't have to, because for the example of the no cost easement to site a wireless transmitter on a water tower is not going to be helpful to a broadband provider that wants to bring fiber to that community. So not all of those elements of community capital may even be usable to that broadband provider. But the idea is to create a nexus here and an opportunity for information sharing such that the provider may be able to make use of those things as a part of their grant application and subsequently reduce the cost or increase the time, or decrease the time for the build out to be completed.
Given individuals are excluded from applying, does that exclude legislators who represent an area?
We believe that legislators may be eligible community applicants. I would encourage you to send that to us in writing because we would like to get that formally documented as well. I'm operating with the belief right now that a state senator could submit an application, but we'd want to confirm that with you in writing.
As a general point of information, COGS submit applications on behalf of cities or counties in Iowa grants as a regular practice. Cities and counties are our members and make up our boards, and we are accountable to them. There's no question in there. I guess it's just a statement.
Yes, I think that's consistent with our understanding. However, we have created flexibility in here for COGS to be the applicant of record. Now, the COGS may or may not choose to do that. There may be other associations with similar missions that may choose to be the applicant of record. And so we're trying to create that flexibility for different constructions. In the case of the COGS, it may always be that you go in and support the city, and the city's the one who's ultimately clicking submit in the Iowa grant system. That may not be the case for another peer organization to the COGS that wants to handle that differently.
Those are all the questions and comments we have today. Unless anybody wants to get anything in here last minute. We still have some time.
Okay. Well, we do appreciate your time and your interest in the program. As I mentioned, following this presentation, we'll be posting the online form on our website for you to submit formal questions that will become binding answers on the office. We'll also be posting this video in the coming days. All of that will be on the ITQ landing page that we described earlier. And we look forward to working with each of you. We're really focused on trying to make this easy. I know we provided a lot of information today, but the goal is to make this as straightforward a process for you as possible. And so we are investing, considerably in resources to make that those supports available to you. So please engage us, keep us posted with your questions, and we're looking forward to seeing your applications as we proceed. And with that, I think we can conclude. Thanks, everyone.